Welcome once again. I'm Charlie Greenberg, your host and moderator for webMethods Wednesdays and Digital Business Demos. In the upcoming months, the series will be providing live business demos that focus on different digital transformation platform strategies and that also demonstrate different components of the digital business platform. Empowering your digital initiatives by designing, composing, and publishing APIs to connect and grow your applications is not a nice-to-have, but a fundamental must-have. And that's why today we're hearing from David Overos, Director of Product Marketing, and today's Demoer-in-Chief, Senior Product Manager, Przemek Kulik. Of course, please feel free during our presentation to use the WebEx Q&A box at the bottom right-hand side of your screen for any questions and comments. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce David Overos.
Hey, thanks, Charlie. And thanks, everybody, for joining today. We're really excited to talk about some of the new capabilities in our webMethods API Gateway. We launched our new API Gateway back in October of 2016, and you didn't get a chance to see it before. We did a digital demo a few months ago where we highlighted some of the new nice features of the new API Gateway. So we're going to talk about more of that today. We're going to start, though, if you're not familiar with Software AG, to give you a little bit of background. We've actually been around for quite a while, nearly 50 years, and in fact, more than 70% of the Global 1000 use Software AG technology to provide their services and applications. In fact, we have over 2 million developers developing applications and business logic on top of our tools, as well as millions of users using Software AG. Not to mention all of the places where customers interact with Software AG technology without even knowing it, as it runs many of the mission-critical systems for large banking and insurance and government organizations around the world. To give you an idea of who we work with, we have thousands of customers across every industry. We have retail customers, we have oil and gas customers, transportation, banking, insurance, you name it, we have customers in that space. And they're not just using us in small ways. Our customers tend to use us in very mission-critical systems, for example, running the integration backbone for their products, building out APIs, all of those kinds of things. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. But don't just take our word for it. If you want to find out what some of our customers have to say about Software AG and our technology, in particular our API management products, you should check out Gartner's Peer Insights site. It's available to anybody, whether you're a Gartner customer or not. You can just log in to gartner.com/reviews, and you can see how our customers have ranked us. You can see that our customers are pretty happy with Software AG's technologies. And if you're a customer and you'd like to post a review, we welcome you to do so. Just to give a little context for what we're going to be talking about today, we're going to dive pretty deep in the demo in terms of how policies work, but I want to make sure that as we go into it, everybody has a good understanding of what it is we're talking about. So as you all know, we live in a very API-connected world. These days, pretty much all interactions between different applications, mobile devices, cloud applications, B2B partners, even Internet of Things and big data sources, really all connect to each other through a common framework, which is the standards and the technology that comes along with open APIs. And in fact, we live in a very API-connected world. We're going to talk about what the implications of that and how you manage that as we go forward. Now, although APIs are not new, the use of them is new over the last several years. In terms of how companies are using APIs to do new kinds of projects. So what most people talk about when they talk about this is they call it the API economy. And why is that API economy driving change across industries today? So what is it? Well, the API economy is new and innovative business models that are based on secure access to functionality and data. And what we mean by that is, if your company has unique services that you provide, say you're a financial services company and you can provide unique services through your financial services data and information, or if you provide specific data, such as mapping data or financial data, you would provide that to end users through an ecosystem of developers and the users that they build. So that would be, partners that you would work with who might build applications using your technology, ultimately for the purpose of getting those services in front of the end users, and it's all done through an API or an application programming interface. And why are people doing this? Well, they're mostly doing it because they want to exchange their data and services for value of some sort. And that value, in many ways, in many cases, when people talk about the API economy, they're thinking of it in terms of direct revenue. Maybe a subscription service that you pay for a month at a time, or you pay for on a per usage basis. However, we want to broaden that discussion to highlight that the value you get back from an API initiative really could just be a broader user base or a broader ecosystem of partners who want to work with you, or even just better visibility into your customer base. There are many different ways that companies derive value through API programs, and those all fall into the category of the API economy. To give you a little more insight into how the actual API management works, and we're going to walk through this very briefly just to give you an idea about how policies fit into API management. Let's first look at it from the point of view, let's say you're an organization and you have back-end systems with data and services like we just talked about. Well, you want to make sure that you can build an ecosystem of partners and third-party developers, and you would do that through the API portal. Now, we've highlighted the API portal in previous webinars, and you can go back and look at those to get a better understanding of those. But the idea is that the developers would look to the portal to find information about your APIs, how to use them, how to test them, how to sign up for them. And then they would build applications. As you can see here, they might be web applications, mobile applications, even Internet of Things type device. At runtime, however, those end users that you're ultimately trying to get in front of, well, they're going to use those applications that we just talked about. And then this is because of a runtime operation, and these users are going to be accessing your organization's back-end systems and data at runtime. And therefore, the gateway provides the right level of security and the right level of management of policies. And this is really what we're going to dive down into today. We're going to talk about what kind of policies would you apply to your gateway to not only protect your back-end services, but also to ensure quality of service and ensure the right level of service level agreement that you make with your partners and your ultimate end users. Now, putting all that together, what kind of capabilities do you need? Well, within the portal, you need the ability to publish and discover APIs, provide documentation, testing, and analytics, even collaboration to help define the right APIs, and monetization to be able to define what those packages and plans look like, whether you're providing a subscription service, pay-per-use service, or even like a freemium model. You still need to define what that's going to look like for your partners when they sign up for it. And then you need to provide the right level of security to protect you from malicious attacks and different kinds of threats, as well as lifecycle management, meaning managing your APIs from the design time through promotion into runtime, even to end of life and retirement of your APIs. And finally, policy management. That's what we're going to focus on today. To give you just an introduction to these as I hand it off to Shemek, we're going to talk about all kinds of policies from threat protection, authentication and authorization, to rate limits and quotas, content validation. These are all just different kinds of policies that you can manage in the API gateway. So with that, I'd like to introduce Shemek Kulik, who's the product manager for these products. Shemek, over to you.
Thank you, David. Let me get into the presentation mode, and we'll quickly get going with the demo. But before we actually dive into the actual demo, a few words of introduction about what you're going to see. let's start with a simple example that explains the need for policies in the API world. So if you have an API that you potentially want external users, application systems to use, you want to do this in a controlled way, in a sense that if these people, these applications are calling your internal services APIs, you want to do this in a controlled way to make sure that they do not flood your infrastructure, that they do not send any malicious content, that you only allow people who actually should have access to the API access them, that you validate the things they're sending and requesting for, that you route the request to a correct endpoint, then you log all the necessary information, right? You need to be able to do all these things so that while providing this extra value services to people externally, you still remain secured yourself. And on the way back to the caller, when you're actually sending the response back, you also might want to do some things to ensure the communication is secure and acting properly. Again, routing it specifically, or maybe responding to any issues and errors that have occurred, right? So these are the sorts of things that you would be enforcing in runtime when dealing with your APIs. In a similar way, that is actually something that is commonly overlooked. When you are on the consuming side, when there is an API out there that you want to be using, you again want to do this in a controlled way that, for example, you at the end of the month, quarter, or year, you don't get a 7-figure invoice from the API provider for the using of the services because you simply did not control the use, right? So again, when you're using something externally, you might want to enforce some rules and policies on how this thing will be used and what will be happening when you use it and then when they respond back. Because similarly to the previous example, when they respond back to you, they are actually sending some data in your environment, and you at least want to make sure that this data does not have any malicious content. So all these things, these enforcements, these rules, these policies, they should be ideally happening in one place to simplify the management, the monitoring of these things in one place. I mean, you could potentially do this within the implementation of your service, but that it would mean a distributed architecture with different policies everywhere, and that with the growing number of APIs, it would become very quickly unmanageable. So this enforcement is actually core function of our API gateway, and that's something we're going to see today. So to make this thing easy to configure, easy to use, easy to understand once configured, we have structured the API call process into different stages, so that again it is easy to understand what's happening at a glance. So there will be multiple stages happening, or each API call will go through multiple stages, and what happens within the stages depends on the configuration you'll do. So I'll walk you through all these stages right now, showing what is possible within them, and then we'll dive into the demo. So every API call will first go to the threat protection layer that is there to make sure that your environment as a whole is protected. So you will find policies here that will protect you from denial of service attacks, for example, that will only allow true traffic that you want to allow, so specific mobile applications or mobile devices. You will not allow messages greater than some specific size, for example. You might want to have an antivirus filter, right? So again, to protect against any malicious content. Same purpose policies like the JSON threat protection or XML threat protection filters that will make sure that whatever is being sent within the payload of the API is safe, right? Or any custom filters you might want to build here. So that's the threat protection layer. That's something that acts globally on the gateway and makes sure that all the calls made to your APIs are actually safe for you. And then we'll be starting on things happening on the transport level of the API call, like requiring some specific protocol to be enforced, like HTTP, HTTPS, or any others. Maybe setting some media types that you might require in the API, or your API might expect. Things like this. When we're done with the transport layer, we're going into the identify and access stage, where we provide policies with different techniques for identifying the calling application, the calling client, for authenticating them, and authorizing them to use the API. And these different techniques, again, they can work on the transport level, on the message level, depending on what the API will be enforcing or what the gateway expects. Once we're done with the identification and authorization authentication, meaning we know who is calling our API, we have identified them. We'll take a look at the message itself, at the message level. So in the request and response processing, you will find policies that will allow you to do something with the payload. I mean, transform the payload or simply validate the payload for the conformance against schema or any other things. Or you might want to invoke some custom logic to run here as well. When we're done with the payload, we enter the traffic monitoring stage, where you have policies to monitor some SLA, service level agreements levels, to simply monitor service performance and alert people when something out of line happens, or policies to optimize the traffic in a way that you will throttle based on who's calling and from where they're calling, and you will allow more traffic or not, or you will be simply caching the API results into the memory so that the performance is improved in case of greater throughputs. Or simply you can be logging things just for audit purposes as well. After this, we enter the routing stage, where you can, again, route the traffic to specific endpoints. This is the place where you actually route it to the actual implementations of the APIs. And it's a pretty rich collection of policies here, starting with straight-through routing to one specific endpoint, through policies that will be routing to different places depending on any content or context information coming with the API invocation. Dynamic routing policies, which are really powerful when it comes to really routing every time to another endpoint if that's required, or even doing load balancing on the gateway level. Like we spawn multiple endpoints of the certain service, and we load balance between them in case of high throughput situations. You can also apply here some outbound authentications, right? Because we might be acting, as I was saying at the beginning, as a client to some external API that we're using. So we're doing both inbound and outbound authentication or security as a in general. So if that happens, we go through response processing that we already discussed, and we, as a last thing before responding to the calling application, we might do any conditional error processing. So in case any error happens, as in the native service, the implementation returns an error, maybe it's unavailable, maybe the call was structured in a way that even though validated, it resulted with some error from the native service. You might want to do some additional processing here before you actually respond to the caller, and you might choose to simply pass on the native response, or you might want to add some business-like language to explain what was happening. With that, let me switch to the product and walk you through some of the things that we talked about. Okay, so I will not be explaining today everything about the API gateway. As David said, we had some sessions in the past. If you want to understand overall what the gateway is doing, there is a session called the new face of webMethods API gateway. It goes through the entire UI. Today I will be more showing the things that have something to do with policy enforcement. So I have some APIs suggested here already, but just to showcase what different policies are doing to API, I'm actually going to create a new one that is hosted here on my side. So I'm going to take this production REST service that I have here, and I'm going to publish it to the API gateway. This publishing step, that what I'm doing right now, this was also demoed on our previous session for how to publish an API in 15 minutes, I think it was. Well, here I've done it in 5 seconds. So we're getting better, as you can see. Right. So yeah, we do have this production API. We just created it. It's not active yet, so the gateway only knows about the existence of it, but it's not enforcing anything. Well, throughout this demo, I will actually be calling this API to show you what different policies are doing to it. And to start off, let me show you what usually this API responds with. So this is my native endpoint. This is not going through the API gateway. And when I call it, it gives me some information about the product. I'm asking for the product ID =1. So it gives me some information about this product. As you can see, I'm not using any authentication, so the service itself is not protected in any way. Let's see what the gateway does to it. So first, to start off, what we can do first is to actually enable this API on the gateway, which will give us the gateway endpoints for accessing these APIs. And the gateway endpoint is something that you would be giving your consumers, something that the external or internal applications will be using to reach the API, right? Because the gateway endpoint is the one to protect the native endpoint. So if we choose one of the available resources here, and I'm going to use these VentureWorks production product resource, I'll be doing GET calls to it. We need to take the gateway endpoint and append the resource at the end. So that's what I'm doing here. We have the gateway endpoint, as you can see, and I have appended the resource. And again, I'm asking for the product ID =1. And
hey, Shemek,
because, yes?
Just to interrupt you for a moment, I just wanted to let you know that there's a little bit of a delay on what you're talking about and what the screen is presenting. So you might need to let it catch up a little bit as you go through. So because of the wonders of web technology, there's a bit of a lag time in what we're showing and what we're saying.
All right. Thanks for letting me know. All right. So what I done just now, I invoked this API through the gateway. Again, I did not use any authentication, so the gateway did not enforce it. The response was okay. And to show you what actually Gateway did so far for this API, because actually something happened, and I'll explain why it happened. Let me switch back to the Gateway UI. And when we take a look at the analytics tab in this API definition, we can see that there was one invocation already done. This was our invocation. I mean, we just registered this API on the gateway. I called it once, and we see that it happened, right? And we see that it happened because actually the gateway policy engine enforced the logging policy on it, even though we haven't done anything yet, right? Because we simply created the API in the gateway, and I just enabled it, and I called it. So the mechanism that actually enabled this logging was something we call global policies, right? I have a global policy defined that is configured to log end-time information for all the API associated with the gateway, and that's what happened to this API. Even though we haven't specifically said that I want things being logged for this API, because we have the global policy defined, it happens automatically. You can think of it as a smart policy provisioning that once defined, it will be enforced on every policy that meets the filtering criteria. And we'll come back to the definition of this policy, but I wanted to show you another type of global policies where we're on it. And this is with the threat protection layer. So I enabled one of the rules here for the denial of service, and just for the demo purpose, I set it in a way that it only allows one request per second. I mean, I know it's a very low number, but just for the demo purpose, so I set it in this way, so that if we come back to the client I've been using here, and I call this API 2 times. At the second time, I'm getting a response from the threat protection layer that, well, the API is not available, and I'm seeing the message from the gateway saying that you have been blocked for 1 minute by the denial of service protection layer because you've been actually calling the service too often. Right. So we've seen already, I'll be switching to the gateway right now. We've seen already 2 global policies enforced on an API without actually configuring anything on API. And that's the nature of the global policies. They are defined and enforced globally, so that even if you bring an API to the gateway after the global policy was created, it will be still enforced. That's a cool thing about it. So before we actually proceed with the rest of the demo, let me actually edit this policy to allow more requests, because we will be calling this API and we don't want the mechanism to interrupt our demo. All right. So still with the global policies, let's actually define one, and you have a chance to see how it works from the definition to the execution. So let's add a new global policy. I'll call it require basic out. So we'll be requiring basic authentication. I'll keep the description for now. I'll go to the next part, which is the filters. The filters are here to tell the gateway what are the criteria for enforcing this policy. So out of all the policies that the gateway knows about, on which APIs, of all the APIs that the gateway knows about, on which of them the gateway needs to enforce this particular policy that will configure later on. So do I want to enforce them on REST and SOAP or only one of them? Do I want to enforce it when only a specific call is being made, like only for if the GET call is being made, or all of them? Or do I want to narrow down the search for the APIs even further? So let's hear that we'll say API name contains product, and it was production, and we'll save it, right? And when we save it, the API gateway will right away tell you which of the APIs are meeting your filter criteria that you have set up. So the filter that we configured actually finds only one API, the one that we have created. So even though it's a global policy, it will be enforcing the policies that will configure on only one API. Now, the remaining thing to be done here is the actual policy configuration. So for this, I'm going into the edit mode again, and we wanted to enforce basic authentication. So that's what I'm going to check here, and I'm going to save it. And I'm not going to activate it again yet. I'm going to leave it as is, right? The global policy is not enabled. So even though it is defined and will be enforced, when I call the API, we'll be getting good responses. And where we're, when we're after enabling the global policy, the gateway starts saying that, well, right now it's actually 401 status code saying unauthorized. The gateway expects you to authenticate yourself before accessing this API. So if we actually add the basic authentication here, and update the request, we'll be getting the proper response just as before, right? So again, we haven't done anything yet specifically on the API. We have only configured a global policy, which was provisioned for all the APIs that were meeting the criteria. And you've seen that even though before the API was responding without authentication, right now the gateway enforces this this policy. Okay. So that was about global policies. When we switch back to the API gateway and go to the actual API that we created, the production API, we can start enforcing additional policies here. Right, and this is being done within this policy stub that you probably recognize the infographic here, similar to the one I was showing on the slide, right, where it goes, the API invocation goes through the different stages before responding back to the caller. And when choosing the policies that you want enforced, you work with this infographic in a way that you choose the stage, and the left-hand side menu focuses on the stage that you have chosen and shows you which are the policies that are available here. Right, and similarly, it works in both ways. If you choose a stage here, it will actually refresh the infographic to show you the stage that you have chosen. I'm sorry. Now, to show you additional levels of policy enforcement, we're going to create something that we call a scope. And it will become obvious in a second what a scope is. So we go into the edit mode of the API, and I'm going to add a scope, give it a name, let's say product resource, right? And again, I'll skip the description. And what I'm doing here is from all the available resources and methods for this API, I'm going to choose only one of them. I want to choose the one that we've been using, the AdventureWorks production product, and I'll create a scope that actually includes all the different methods. You could actually pick and choose any of them to later on use in enforcements, but I'm going to choose the entire resource with all the methods supported on this resource by the native API, and I'm going to save it. So what it tells the API gateway is that in addition to the API and things that are happening on the API level, there is something below the API level that is called a scope, and this scope is called a product resource with a typo. I'm sorry for that, right? And we can use this scope in API policy enforcements as well. So if we go to our policy definition tab, we could work with this screen enforcing policies on the API level, or we could switch here to a chosen scope. There could be multiple of them, right? We have just created one, but this could be multiple scopes here. The tooltips here will be telling us what is the scope in detail, right, in case we don't know it. But once I switch the focus here to this scope, I might be adding policies here that will be only enforced for this scope and not the rest of the API. So if we go to the edit mode, and let's say in the identify and access, we're going to require an API key for calling this API. So you remember that the API as a whole already requires us to provide basic authentication, username and password, because the gateway enforces this on the global level. We're going to ask for an additional identification with API key if you want to call something that is within this scope. And within this scope, we define that we have this product resource. So we're going to require an API key and save it, right? And when we activate the API, if we go back to our REST client, and when we call the API, this product resource right now, the gateway will not allow us to, because it knows that right now additional identification is required. So before we actually provide it, we will not see the response from the API. At the same time, when we do a call to the same API but to different resource, I'll be calling the bill of materials resource right now. Well, when I call it, it will tell no good because you have not authenticated. So if I do the basic authentication, I'm going to see the response. So the global policy is being enforced here, but the scope policy is not, because bill of materials is not within the scope that requires API key. All right. So to show you that the API key will be actually read here and enforced, I'll switch back to the gateway again, and well, I need to get an API key. Normally, consumers would get API keys or OAuth tokens or whatever API tokens to use the API through the API portal. Right, you register to the portal, you find your API, you request access, and when the access is granted, you're getting information about, okay, this is your API key. Please use it when calling this API. Now, I'm going to do a shortcut here, and I'm going to create an application in the gateway, which will take a gateway that this application can use. Can use this API, which is essentially what the API portal is doing behind the scenes where access is granted. So creating this application, I'll call it DBD demo app. While creating this, I could provide some additional information how the gateway could identify whether this is really this application by, I don't know, maybe by reading the IP from its calling, maybe using some certificates, or simply checking the information from the context of the calling. And the last thing, we need to tell the gateway that this application can access this API. And once we save it, we'll get the API key. We'll get OAuth credentials, as you can see here as well, but we're not using OAuth right now. We'll just use the API access key. And we need to use this key when calling the API. So again, I'm switching to the REST client. And to make this call successful, I need to add the gateway to my invocation. So all right. Oh, sorry, typo. And this is my key. And now when we call it, we're getting the response back. Right. And again, if we call the other resource that is outside of the scope without the API key, it also works. So here you see policy enforcements on different levels, right? We've had the threat protection, we had the logging policy on the global level, then we added the logging policy pre-existed, then we added additional global policy for requiring basic authentication that is being enforced for everything in the API, and then we added a scope level policy that does something on the scope level. Alrighty, coming back to the gateway, there are still things that could be configured and done when working with policies within APIs. So as you can see that the configuration here can become complex, right? When you keep adding policies and policies are coming from different levels of enforcement. Right, and therefore you'll see a lot of visual clues to let you know and understand why some particular things are appearing here or not. So when we're looking at this, for example, we actually see there are two identification policies applied here. One is to identify and authorize that requires an API key. Another one requires basic authentication, right? But these little icons, you can see also a legend down there, tell us that this guy comes from, to require basic auth comes from a global policy, and this guy comes from a scope level policy. Things without icons, like here, they are an API level policies. And again, you could be switching back and forth between API level and scope level policies. There's one more thing to show you, and this is the policy templates. So once you are done with defining your policies for specific API, and maybe it actually involved a lot of policies, maybe it didn't involve a lot of them, but some of them are pretty complex to configure, you might want to save it as a template. So to say that, okay, this is a template that I want to use later on different APIs. So not necessarily use it as a global thing, not to enforce it on everything, but have it ready as a template in case I will need it for an API in the future that will be serving similar purpose or require similar enforcement. So when you save it as a template, you will need to give this template name, like, I don't know, level 1 security enforcement, right? And then you will describe it and you save it. When you save something as a template, the gateway actually takes you to the policy template definition area. If I go back, you will see that we're at the policies area, in the policies area where the threat protection policies are, where the global policies are, and now we're in the templates. We had 2 templates existing here. We just added this one. You can delete them from here. You can actually copy them from here, modify things, and maintain the catalog of your templates within this page. The template will look exactly the same as you configured this on the policy definition, but from now on, it is available here for reuse. So anything you have on your API, you might want to save it as a template. That's possible. The other direction is, of course, also possible. When you're working with your APIs and you know there is a template you might want to use, you simply say apply template, and it brings up a screen with all the templates listed. You might review what kind of policies they have defined by default. You can pick and choose between them. You can choose multiple, like all of them, right? And then again, understand what they are doing. And when you click next, the API gateway will help you resolve some of the conflicts that might appear, right? So, for example, we have the same policy here that cannot coexist, right? The routing policies, they cannot coexist. You need to choose one or the other. Similarly, the transport policies, again, they cannot coexist. But some of the policies, like logging policy, you can see that there are actually 3 of them. One is coming from the global policy. The other are coming from, one is coming from the logging template. One is coming from another template that we just created before, right? And this is a type of a policy that can coexist, so the gateway is not telling you that there's a conflict you should resolve. So you could resolve the conflict here. Like, I mean, first of all, when you click on the policies, right, you will be able to introspect the definition, that the configuration of the policy, so that you understand which one you might want to choose for this particular API. So when you're done with this, you can say, okay, so I'm going to resolve this conflict here, but I'm going to import the rest with the conflicts. And when you do that, on the policy definition screen, again, the gateway will hint you that there's something wrong with the configuration. There's a reddish thing around this stage. When you click on it, you'll see that there are 2 policies that are conflicting each other. And you cannot really go next from this stage before resolving this conflict. So if I attempt to save it, the API gate will tell me that you need to really resolve this conflict before saving, because it makes no sense to have these policies coexist. The gateway will not know what to do. So you'll simply need to remove one of them, and then you will be able to save it, right? And later on, activate and use the API. So that's it for the demo. But let me still summarize the thing for you on an additional slide. So As you have seen, there are multiple levels of policy enforcement, and the gateway is doing a lot to make it easy for you to configure and understand. Here is just a slide to summarize what's happening and how the gateway is computing the effective policies that will be enforced on a particular call. So on the left-hand side here, I'm just having two sample APIs, the customer API and the product API with some resources in it that will be responding to some specific HTTP methods. So you've seen that we might have global policies, API policies, and scope policies, scope level policies, right? And we might have global policies that are finding both of these APIs, and because in nature this is a global policy, so whatever it enforces will be enforced on all the resources and methods within the API. Another global policy might find only one API because the filter was configured in this way, and it was also configured in a way that it will not be enforcing anything on the GET calls, right? That is possible. Additionally, you might have policies defined on the API level for the customer API, and again, since it's an API level enforcement, it will be propagated to all the resources and methods within the API. For another API, you might have another set of policies. And again, because it's an API level, it will be enforced on everything within the API. And then we had the scope level policies that allowed you to arbitrarily create a scope first. So to say that I'm creating a scope that will have only this customer/ID resource with only the put method with it. I'm creating additional scope that takes multiple resources from the product API, but will be enforcing things on put, post, and delete methods, as in the methods that will actually be modifying my resource. The gets are usually reads, right? So I will not be enforcing things on the get method because it's usually a read action, but I will be enforcing things on the put, post, and delete because they will be changing something for me. Now, API Gateway will take these definitions and will compute what needs to happen when someone is making a call, a specific call to a specific API and the resource. So if someone is making a put call to the customer/ID resource of the customer API, this is the set of policies that will be enforced. Similarly, or well, in contrast to this, same resource, but when someone does a different call, it will have a different set of policies applied because we have policies defined on different levels, right? And so on and so forth. On the product API for the brand product resource, there will be differences for when someone makes a get call and when they make a put call, and so on and so forth. Right, so this picture may become a pretty complex, and it is essential for the gateway to be able to actually help the API provider here and tell them what is going to be enforced and when. So for this, we have this overview screen here that provides you with a summary of all the policy enforcements. So you'll see here API level policies defined on the API level. This will include the policies that are coming from the global definitions, right? But since global policies are essentially working on the API level as well, they will appear here. You will have scope level policies with all the scopes listed. With all the scopes listed. So we only created one scope, product resource. So that's why we have one column saying that on this product resource scope, we have one policy enforced. if I had multiple scopes here, they would just be shown here as additional columns. And the last column on this screen always will provide you with this single view of what is going to be enforced if someone calls this method on this resource within this API. If I'm doing a GET call to the bill of materials, which we've been doing before, in the identify and access, we have the things that were requiring the basic authentication, right? But when we do a GET call to the product resource, yes, right, we're going to see that there will be additional things enforced here. So the API gateway here also provides you a view on what the gateway will compute in the runtime when someone makes a specific call to a specific resource, just so the API provider can understand it quickly. And with that, I hand it back to David.
Thanks, Shemek. And can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Okay, so thank you, Shemek, for walking through that the demo. There's a lot of detail in there. You can see that there's a lot of different ways that the API Gateway can manage policies. Just to kind of recap what Software AG has to offer in this space, we spent a lot of time talking about the API Gateway today. The overall Software AG API management platform includes the API developer portal, which we've covered in other episodes. We also have an API catalog that provides more governance and more sort of dependency management, a lot more high-powered sort of lifecycle management capabilities are available in our API catalog. And finally, one thing that we haven't talked about a lot in the past, but we increasingly get questions about is, how can I manage the consumption of APIs if I want to make sure that I don't use more API, say, throughput or number of transactions from third-party providers, but I can. Software AG provides the ability to manage the consumption of other people's APIs to help protect you from ringing up very big bills, just for example. Why Software AG? Well, we have just some of the high-level benefits of why someone would be interested in talking to Software AG about our API management solution. One is that we have a very tightly integrated integration and API management solution. So many APIs can be defined and built within our integration platform and then exposed into our API management platform, and it's very seamless. So of course, we work with third-party API development environments, but because we are all built on the same technology, we provide extra capabilities when integrating directly into our own integration API development platform. We have a secure, non-intrusive approach to securing access to our gateway. If you're not familiar with it, we have a reverse invoke technology for interacting between our gateway, which is running in the DMZ, back to our on-premises environment. This is something that when we talk with the industry analysts, they recognize as being something that Software AG is particularly strong at. I just talked a little bit about our API consumption management, and of course, we do provide the end-to-end API management. So we provide all of the different components you need to be successful with your API program. To find out how we're doing across the industry, you can see this is the latest Forrester API management wave, and you can see that Software AG is a strong performer. This was our first appearance in the wave, and they specifically called out that we provide very rich governance and very strong collaboration for enterprise API maturity. And so with that, I'm going to hand it back to Charlie to wrap up and cover any Q&A.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Przemek. And we do have a number of questions. We are at the top of the hour, but we're going to keep going and see how far we can get. If we don't answer any of them or they're latecomers, be assured that we will follow up. And, of course, you're always invited to use the email addresses of our presenters, which is at the bottom middle of the screen. So let's start with one. I'm going to break up into a couple parts. The first one I'm coming to is, firstly, we'd like to confirm that the policies are rule-based, and the next part of that question would be, will there be options to dynamically enforce policies from externally defined frameworks like AI, for instance? Who will take that one?
That would be a Przemek question. Przemek, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I just needed to unmute myself. Yeah, so the first question was about whether the policies are rule-based. Some of them are, specifically the threat protection policies. They're rule-based in a sense that you define a rule that will, for example, allow messages of sizes not greater than, or that will allow that many calls per minute, second, or whatever. So in that sense, they are rule-based. But there will be policies, both global and local, as we call them. They are not necessarily rules, right? Like the policy that we've been enforcing today for requiring the basic authentication or API key, they're not really rules. You're just saying that you need an API key before you let anyone to use. Right, so all these security policies, be the basic of API key or of SAML, Kerberos, certificates, or whatever else, they're not really rules. You can think of them, but that's semantics, I guess. So it's a mixture of rule-based and like more specific policies. Now the second
within
question
the context
was.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, go ahead, Charlie. No,
so within the context of that same question, for instance, if there's a new virus discovered, how can we set the system to automatically enforce checks?
Right. So virus protection in our threat protection layer, we're using the ICAT standard, and the gateway itself does not provide the database or the engine that is doing the virus scanning, but you can plug in the virus scanning solution into the gateway using the ICAT standard. That's our approach here. So assuming that whatever is the thing doing the scanning, it should have the latest definitions of the latest viruses and things like this.
So do we enforce data security like sign-on, encryption, or decryption?
That depends on the type of the security policy used. So if you simply say I require basic auth, that's what it says. It is basic auth only. So once someone has authenticated themselves successfully within the gateway, they are entitled to use the API or the defined scope. But if you use something more complex, such as Kerberos or SAML that might involve signing and encryption, then yes, that's definitely possible.
Okay, and along those lines, which are the authentication and authorization security policies, such as OAuth or API key, client authentication, that you suggest for maximizing the usage and the user experience of the API portal for third parties and partners?
Oh, you could write a master thesis on that, really. I mean, the key here is to think with the consumer in mind, and I think the question implies that, so that whenever you're designing your API, you're thinking about how the consumers will be using it. And then there are different strategies for making the security easier to use for your consumer, because that's what you want to do, but then again, still keeping you secure enough. If this is an API that is meant to be consumed externally, really like externally from the the organization providing the API, the latest trends they suggest, and our customers are using things like API keys or OAuth tokens, and here they both rely on the gateway to enforce them. So you might have the API gateway to be both the resource server and the authorization server, or you might want to rely on a third-party identity providers, such as Ping Identity or Okta, right? These are third-party solutions that we actually integrate with, and you can say that, okay, so the API gateway is my resource server. This is where all my APIs reside, but my identity provider will be at Okta, for example, so that whoever wants to use my API, we will register them, or they need to be registered with Okta, and that all the checks and validations of the tokens being, I don't know, OAuth tokens or other things, because they do much more than OAuth, will be enforced there. But it's getting a lengthy answer. But yeah, the light for external consumption, the lighter mechanisms such as an API key or OAuth are preferred and mostly used, whereas in the enterprise implementations for internal use, sometimes for external as well, but not that often. Customers use SAML or Kerberos, especially where the satellite systems require it. Sometimes it's a requirement from the system, so SAML or Kerberos enforcements are in use. Certificates as well, that's specifically into B2B communication. So if you're setting up your gateway to be a B2B gateway and you allow your partner to invoke APIs, then most likely you have exchanged security certificates with your partners, and you can use it as well.
Thank you. So talk about the status of mediator, please. Let me say that again. Mediator, please. And if you're a mediator customer, can it be replaced with API gateway?
Sure. David, you want me to take it, or do you want to take it?
I'll start it, and then you can add if you want to. So Mediator provides some of the same functionality as the API gateway. And Mediator is going to continue to be supported, but as you may or may not know, the Mediator uses Centrosite as its primary user interface for defining a lot of what we looked at today. So the new API gateway provides kind of a streamlined approach to doing a lot of the defining of the capabilities without requiring Centrosite. However, if you need some of the more fundamental capabilities that come with Centrosite, you would want to continue to use that. So there's no rule that says you have to switch today between Mediator and the API gateway, and we're not going to be dropping support for Mediator, so you can continue to use that.
And the other part of the question was that as a mediator customers, yes, you will be entitled to get the API gateway, right?
Yeah.
Okay, here's a question about API management. What's the coding language? Is it Java, C, C++, Flow series running on IS?
Coding language or what? So we developed our products in Java, but I'm not sure that was the question. All the policies that you defined in the API gateway, as you have seen, this is configuration-based. In the request and the response processing, there was an option to call out to webMethods IS for additional logic, whatever you would code on IS. And then it doesn't matter from the gateway point of view whether the service on IS is coded in the Flow language, or is it coded in Java or in C, C++. It has to be webMethods IS service, and the gateway will will know how to use it.
Do we need the IS to have the API management system run?
No, I mean, no, it's
API
Gateway has been made a standalone product. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, go ahead, David.
I was just going to say, I mentioned that a little bit before. So you can use the integration server for developing your APIs, for running the services that are on the back end, but it is not required. You can use our API management platform to, promote and run third-party APIs as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. And regarding the API catalog, is it the same as the one in CentraSite?
Yes, it is.
Very good. And that's going to take us to our final question. And then if you have additional comments, I'd ask you to make them, please. But is there a limit to the number of policies you can configure for an API?
No. Let me think about it. No, I mean we do not enforce any limits. I mean the only limit I can think of is that if you would really put all the policies that are possible or available within the gateway, but then again some of them can be applied multiple times. So no, there's no limit.
And just to add on to that,
Yes.
I was going to say that some of different vendors handle this different ways, and so some API gateway vendors might allow you to provide many different policies at the gateway layer. And in that case, sometimes what you might find is that the gateway becomes overloaded because it's actually doing some of the work that should be handled at the service level. And so in this case, it comes down to what's the best choice for how do you design your APIs and how do you expose them. So in some cases we've seen it makes a lot more sense for people to build out a lot of their logic within the integration platform and then limit what they're exposing and applying as policies at the gateway layer.
Well, that's a very good comment. Everything looks like a nail if you have a hammer in your hand. So yeah. You really need to make sure that you're using the right tool for the right purpose.
Yeah. Great. Our thanks again to David Ovros, Przemek Kulik, for this great presentation. Over the next 30 days, we're going to be talking about dynamic apps. We're going to be talking about B2B capabilities, managed file transfer, and yes, even master data management over the next 30 days. Please join us for those sessions at this same time. In the meantime, we will be sending out links to YouTube for today's presentation, and we hope to see you in the very near future. Thank you.